Welcome to the 2-Month Review, a weekly podcast brought to you by 3% Open Letter, in which we take a single book, long, difficult book, break it down section by section, talk about it, analyze it, make jokes about it, have fun, all that kind of stuff. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I'm joined as always by Brian Wood.
Hello, Chad. Excellent to be here.
Yeah, I know we've had some technical difficulties of sorts. We may have some in the middle of this, so if it gets interrupted, all apologies to everyone watching and or listening. We're doing the best we can on a Thursday morning, in which there is a baseball game that is in the 12th inning right now. And the book that we've been covering this whole season, our 7th season, is Radiant Terminus by Antoine Volodine. And today we're going to be talking about the last 11 chapters, chapters 39 through 49. And it's the end of the book, the end of everything, and basically literally the end of everything. We'll get into it and see what you think. But to try and solve it stuff into here too, I'll just give a quick recap of where we are. The main characters, I want to say what you need to know. The main setup is that there was a commune after the fall of the Second Soviet Union called Radiant Terminus, in which there's a man named Solovey who is incredibly evil and powerful and can go into people's minds and dreams, basically mind rapes and mind fucks his daughters and everyone and anyone who's like associated with them. One of the people who becomes associated with them is Kronauer, who with his two friends Vasilisa and Ilyushenko was trying to make do after the fall of the Soviet Union by crossing all this like landscape, this Tarkovskian landscape, and came across Radiant Terminus. He got involved with Kronauer, tried to destroy him, had a night in which he ran amok, was pretty unsuccessful, was then captured by Solovey, tried in a very humiliating way last episode of this, last section of the book, last time we talked, and then was sent out into the taiga where he's wandering, where Samaya, one of Solovey's daughters, is wandering, where Hanko Vagulian lives in a house by herself, acting as if she's like Grandma Ugdal, the woman who took care of the nuclear core at Radiant Terminus, and where Miriam Ubarak, at the end of the last episode in which we talked, was living with her husband out in the taiga as well, and all of a sudden, like these I don't know what you want to call them, like bandits came up and seized her and raped her and killed her husband and took her hostage as a sex slave. And that's basically where we are. And that's where we are in a long-winded way. Everything's coming to an end. Everyone's wandering out in the taiga, and we can go through this chapter by chapter. Although, to be honest, like I think we could do it by storyline. And the ending part is really like, I'm curious to hear what you think and what the readers make out of it, and like how it gets interpreted, because it a lot of things that we've been talking about all seem to have built together into this point, and there seems to be some sort of almost thesis about humanity at the end of this. That's unnerving.
As it should be if we're dealing with human beings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what was your thought on these last sections, just generally?
I don't know. It seems like it kind of like all the things that were hinted at are really kind of hammered home. Like the bird, for instance, like the bird imagery of Solovey, and like now it's just a straight up bird, like, right? Like there's no
bird that can talk and like help direct you, though.
Yeah,
in your mind. Yeah, so we can start with like 39 is Hannah Vogulian is writing, and she's been rewriting all of Maria Quall's books and trying to like put them back into existence, and she's also writing like her diaries and rewriting all the things that her father had used as his like crazy poetry that would like ruin everyone's lives and take over their mind.
Dogs in the Taiga. That's a nice title. I like that.
Dogs in the Taiga. You should rename your book.
Yeah.
last second change.
Hey, I got a new title, and let's do a whole new cover, and yeah.
How does that sound?
Works for me. No.
But she's been writing this, and one thing that was interesting in this section to me was 417, where she's trying to rewrite the Maria Qual books from memory, which is, a choice. And it says,
Which is a choice.
Here a new rape scene, another one. I've systematically avoided describing them in detail. Looting them is enough. For victims, it's unbearable. For witnesses, it's equally unbearable. We're confronted with the filthiness of the Cox language. At one moment or another, we have to go along with the exhalations of the Cox language. We have the impression of sharing something with the rapist. And every description of rape comes in an element of complicity. I've always avoided that, and it's not because I know Miriam Umarak and that I'm going to watch the scene objectively as a witness, that I'm going to plunge back into the horror subjectively, incarnating myself with her. So this is crazy for a couple reasons. I mean, one is like the avoidance of the rape scenes is something that's been kind of happening throughout Radiant Terminus. Like they happen, but they're just stated generally.
Yeah.
And like the mind part is always dealing with like after Solivier or whatever, Solivier has gone into their minds and like they're left with guilt and trauma and can't really process that. It's dealing with like those after effects, but that the way that it's described of him being in their mind is usually like he just went in and took over as if it were like his space. But it doesn't describe it in like a physical form. And even like last time with Miriam Mubarak, it says like, then she was raped. It doesn't describe that in detail, which is, in my opinion, for the best, I think. But this seems to be like kind of the thesis on that like describing it, you become complicit because words draw you into that situation, or fiction works. But what's weird here is that she's writing this stuff. She's speaking on behalf of Maria Qual or her own self, and she's writing the scene in which Miriam Umarak is raped, if that's the I here is Hanko, but she wouldn't know that. So this is like getting into like that metatextuality of this book.
Yeah.
Where it's the author themselves is not writing that scene, and in a way, Hanko's not writing that scene as the author of Radiant Terminus either.
Well, I've given up on all of that kind of stuff just because of like the numbers and time. Like
I think they're all multiples of 49.
Yeah, had I been a better reader, I would have written down all the numbers and then really kind of dug into them to get the meaning of them or whatever. But like at this point, I realize like people live to be thousands of decades, whatever. Like, okay, whatever. Like I'm not, I'm not trying to keep track of all this. So I don't know, like as far as trying to figure out a timeline of sequentially when did this occur to the sister? When is this being written, before or after, or like I took it as long after, but
I think that part's happening simultaneous because I think now we're in a point where the time that's passed is all here. Everyone's here now for the reasons
after the incident and the trial, and it's been 700 whatever
years, 1,000 years,
whatever the angel number is. Yeah.
Just to mark your numbers thing. This is jumping ahead, but on 455, there's one paragraph that talks about this. Of post-exoticism, which she knew little about, Hanko Bogulian had mainly remembered their formalist constraints. And that's why she persisted in dividing her book into 49 chapters, or even 343 parts. And every so often, she tallied up what she had produced, the idea that it might be good to number her works in order to arrive, after several centuries, at a harmonious whole. A multiple of 7 are made up of identical numbers, like 111 or 1,111. So there's like, the numbers are meaningful in that way. As like even 343, the multiples of 7, 49 for the Bardo.
How many chapters do we have?
49.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And they get there's something probably going on with the word count between all these sections too, because the chapters get shorter as it goes along. But I don't know if I wouldn't know what that is, and I don't know if it would convert in the translation, to be honest. But
it makes me wonder too, like this is just the dumb thought that just came into my head, which usually you shouldn't share, but whatever. It makes me curious as to with like radiation, and there's like half-lives, and there's numbers for atomic numbers, and if there's any kind of like, that's a weird thing to do, but
that would be
let me mute and pause for just a second. I have to take care of something real quick.
Okay, I will just vamp here for a bit. So Hanko Bogulian's writing those books. I like that section quite a bit because hers is the most straightforward about like all the problems of relations between males and females and the kind of disgusting aspect to all of that. This is another section about the Cox blood and language that is pretty unnerving on page 418 that deals with that. But then we go on to chapter 40. In which we are with Miriam Umarak now. So this may be, in a theory, the section that Hanko's about to write, in which she's been captured. She is basically like a sex slave for these three supposed merchants who are basically just trolling, going around this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and are taking whatever they can find and doing whatever they can do. And they found her. They took her. She's now a sex slave that. This gets worse. I'm going to just read this paragraph to describe what they're doing. 421. When they discovered that her beautiful hair was actually a wig, they felt like they had been hoodwinked, and the youngest one had been so overcome with rage that he had unsheathed the knife to cut her throat. The others had restrained him at the last moment. Don't forget that she can, if we bring her with us, spread her legs for us every day, and then, if we've had enough of her, we can cut her up, drain her dry, and turn her into pemmican. And that is how she left her husband Barguzin, as a sex slave and a future basic ingredient in an energy-giving preparation. Which is very disturbing. But this goes on in this section, and sort of like the better, like the sort of comeuppance of these merchants, in which Miriam is being taken aside by the youngest of the three merchants, where he is going to obviously like rape her and whatnot. And then she sees a bird. The bird sort of directs her through mental communication in the way that Solivier had forever, but when he was doing it before, it was very aggressive and awful. In this case, the bird is like telling her what you can grab that's a side, and she slashes his throat. Then the second person comes to rape her. She kills him. She kills a third one. Well, she doesn't kill them. She cuts their throat so that they can't speak and they can't communicate. And all three of them are there. The bird manages to throw them somehow, which I don't want to envision a bird that's capable of throwing human beings, because birds are creepy to me, especially if you think of them being large size like that. But whatever, the bird moves the three merchants aside and then directs her to get an axe, where she goes and just chops them apart, mostly between their legs. So she gets free. She is now free. She like Miriam Umarak raises her axe. She obeys the bird. Left, middle, right orders the bird. Between the legs orders the bird. Left, middle, right. So she has done what like, I mean, it's a championship moment in a way for like being able to like overcome this horrible situation and mutilate and destroy these three awful dudes. But still, it's been fairly traumatic for her and for her existence. But she is now free. Hanko is in her space, and chapter 41 goes more into, again, like what she should do. And she is. So this is a very short chapter. These two are tied together. In which she's like, what should I do now? The bird's like, you should keep going. So like, I could return to Barguzin, but I don't know the way back. And the bird's like, sure, but the forest is a labyrinth. You're going to get lost. It's better you go forward. And besides, Barguzin is dead. So she's like, okay, cool. Just going to go on. She doesn't talk to the bird about like what had happened in that previous night or whatnot, but they continue as traveling companions. And then she asked the question, once back where I was living, there's Solivier, she said suddenly. Did you know him? Never heard of her. The bird lied, then indicated that it would leave. It waved its wings. They were extraordinarily black. And the beasts, Miriam Umarak asked, if I were you, I'd make pemmican out of them, the bird advised. So this is maybe, as we're getting to the end, and we've had all these different threads going with the relationship between Solivier and other people, the kind of fascist thought, the Cox language, his relationship to his daughters, and that he refers to frequently as daughters or wives in a very disturbing way. This part, not only does she get to overcome the three men and murder them, but there is a moment of reconciliation there. If assuming that the bird is Solivier and the bird is lying by saying, I don't know who Solivier was or is, or what you're talking about, but is directing her and helping her along. He helps her escape. He doesn't do anything bad to her, and then he advises her what to do for the future, so that she can continue surviving. So there is maybe a moment here of like a reconciliation, or like a moment of kindness from Solivier towards Miriam by using his bird powers and his mind powers to set her free, and to set her free in a post-apocalyptic landscape in which there's not much to do or ways to live is maybe not, the best situation, but at least there's a little hint of something good there. Although it's hard to say that seriously, knowing how awful Solivier was the entire book to this point. I'm sure you caught all of that, Brian.
None of it.
Yeah, I was saying that there's a last moment. I'll just I'm not going to recap it, but the last second was like that when Miriam gets free after she's directed by the birds to kill all the men, that the bird lies and says it's not Solveig, but like it seems to be a moment of possible reconciliation between Solveig and Miriam, of he helped her out and didn't take advantage of her or harm her in any way at that moment.
Yeah, there is some strange, like, tenderness isn't the right word, but there's something very different about Solveig at the end of here.
Yeah,
especially with like there's that moment with him and before Grandma Ugdal jumps into the. Did you already cover that as well?
Nope, that's coming in a few minutes. But yeah. So
the axe chopping of the genitalia, man, that was awesome.
Yep, she finally she Captain Marveled it. She got up and just chopped chopped that Cox language right at its base.
What was that music video that I sent to you? And I said, dude, this reminds me so much of Radiant Terminus.
Shoot, I don't remember.
But basically, the music video, it's really intense, and it's this weird kind of like noise rock band.
It was someone I knew.
Yeah, and the music video starts. It's what?
It was a song by Health.
Okay.
They have one really great song, but
and it's this lady. It's like the quote. It looks like a typical scene from like a B movie horror flick, like a slasher film.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even kind of shot in that grainy. They're running through the woods. It's dark, and she's in a dress and she's running, and she's got this big, flowing, tangled blonde hair and just mascara streaming everywhere. And she's running in slow motion. And behind her is like this ogre man. That's where he's got no clothes on except for like a white tighty whities, I think.
Yeah.
And he's chasing her with a machete. And he's just like this disgusting, like grotesque looking big dude. Like very, just like every ugly thing about masculinity like is on this person.
Yeah.
So she's running and finally catches up to him. And she's like giving in to about to die. And the guy raises the machete above his head and then she just stabs him in the dick with a stick or something. And it is the most over the top violent thing that happened. Like it's just torrents of blood coming out of this wound. Right. And then she grabs the dropped sword or machete and lops his head off. And then it's like more like another fountain that just comes out. And she just starts just screaming. And then it ends with her taking her wig off and she has short cropped black hair. But so it's just like super intense.
Very
just like
Radiant
very
Terminus.
graphic. And it was like, this is Radiant Terminus all the way.
Yep.
So you look up the band Health, do Health music video on YouTube. I'm sure it'll pop up if you want to see a music video rendition of Radiant Terminus. I think that is a must watch.
I'm going to guess that most people aren't going to do that.
All sorts of trigger warnings. It is violent as get out. Like there's blood everywhere, but it's in a comical fashion at the same time. But yeah, but that's what this reminded me of. Like it's that. Oh, I gotta get some water for my daughter. 1 second. My goodness.
Yeah, you guys can find that. I'm gonna go on and recap 42 because it's kind of fun to recap this while Brian's away, and then he can come back and make comments. But 42 is with Aldele Sholoff, who was Hanko's husband, who is the singer who Solveig, after their wedding night, like got him to vanish and erase the memories of her from his mind, and sent him out wandering. So he's wandering, and he and Kernauer have met up. They're traveling together. But they don't. The best part of this is that they've been walking, but it took them so long. They've been alone for so long they couldn't remember how to communicate. So after decades or centuries of solitary walking, their vocabulary had diminished and was slow to return. But it came back at last. A gruff rapport had been established between the two men. In either case, neither was aggressive towards the other. So they're wandering. They find like the railway, the railroad, and they're like, there must be a camp at the end. And they're like, yeah, that sort of makes sense. And then they have this recounting of like their time together at Radiant Terminus, in which neither one of them can really remember anything. But Kernauer can more than Sjón, because Sjón had his memory basically wiped by Solveig. So he's like, Adela's like, I love this woman. I don't remember her name. This guy screwed up my memory. And Kernauer's like, who? And he's like, I don't know. I don't remember. And he's like, oh yeah, I was in a place like that too. did you know like Vasilisa Marchelvi or Samaya Schmidt or Miriam Remark or Hanka Volgulian, who was Schulhoff's wife? He's like, nope, never heard of them. He's like, yeah, why would you have? And they just like go on. He's
have
like,
you heard of the president of Radiant Terminus? Nah.
Nah, I don't remember any of this.
Oh, that's from a long time ago, like 1,000 years.
I don't remember. This is the saddest line too. I don't remember her name anymore. He said, I loved her. Yes, that's for sure. But I don't remember her name anymore. Is Kernauer trying to say like who his wife was, which is Irina that was raped and murdered. And he's like, no, that was my wife, but like, it's all gone now. So, so they're together. And 43, this is the part where a lot of these chapters kind of go together. And 43 is them talking again. This is Crow appears. Good morning. And then the Crow appears. They talk about the bird for a second. And then Schulhoff, who's been like the singer and always told these stories, tells the story that we've already encountered of where they do, when he and all the various Ilyushenko and the various people on the train reached Radiant Terminus and like go out to like try and get into Radiant Terminus, and they're rebuffed and there's a huge firefight and everything goes crazy. He recounts that in his own way, but telling it as like spectacular heroes and spectacular backgrounds, and tells that story, but it's like he can't remember it completely and doesn't have all the pieces there and doesn't connect it with anything else. So it's like this is part of the like post-apocalyptic myth making. So like now at this point, this singer that's orally passing down these stories is telling the story of these heroic characters who came to this doorway, were trying to like go in, were denied, and then the delegation had made insane speeches in front of the door, and when they were told that there are no more free spots in the barracks, they'd grown angry and raised their voices. And then there's like a ton of shooting, and everyone ends up on their backs, indifferent to the sequence of events. And I think that that's kind of amazing because that's like a seed of like the potential for a future world or not a future world. Like it's a crazy myth that's told incorrectly in the way that myths would be told incorrectly, but also doesn't have a heroic ending to it.
Yeah, I found it really interesting as well. Just thinking of it now, there's that interesting juxtaposition the author does here where you get the way like one of the written history versus the men are regaling through songs of their conquest or whatever, right? And both of them have it kind of wrong, right? Yeah. Like not kind of like both of them have it totally wrong, but this is going to be how history is told, either through remembering it the best you can and paraphrasing and writing it down, or using your faulty memory to sing songs and orally pass it, like whether it's written or orally passed, like it's you're passing down something like worse and worse, and it's deteriorating and deteriorating and deteriorating.
And there's a contrast between where she's writing down the stories of women being raped and attacked, and maybe if she writes Miriam's story of her killing those three guys, that's sort of like a positive narrative stroke in which Miriam is successful. Like, I mean, for all the horror that she lived through, she does overcome it and murders those three guys and gets free. And then they're telling their story where it's supposed to be heroic and it's just a impotent failure. Going there and like and making insane speeches and like bullets flying everywhere, but like ineffectively, and they're lying on the ground with snowflakes and like they're all screwed. So it's interesting that they're those two contrasts too between the female version and the male version, written and oral. I like that. Like this part starts to hit like it's crazy. Let's get through it, and then I have the comment. So 44 is the one that you're talking about, where Grandma Ugdal, 44 and 45, our Grandma Ugdal and Solveig are at the core, and Grandma Ugdal's like, "That's it. I'm just going to kill myself.
I'm jumping, man. I'm going in.
I can't deal with this anymore." After the last 79 decades, her physical state had degraded. And then she's trying to talk to Grandma Ugdal, and she's like, she's like, "I can't play your songs anymore because the membrane's broken. It's too dried out. No sound's coming out." And he's like, "I don't understand what you're saying." She's like, "No, the skin's resonance, the phonograph, it's not the best quality. I don't understand you at all," Solveig repeated. "You're as clear as a Buddhist rattle being shaken in a bucket of oil." And then she goes on in the next chapter where she's like, "Yeah, I'm really going to totally like step over the edge." She's like, "You have nothing left to do in this world. You only have to go with me. It'll be the end that we've been dreaming of 1,000 years," in which they both jump into the core together and commit suicide together in this like grand show of love. And he's like, "What? I don't understand a word of what you're chatting."
I'm good.
And then she's like, She's like, we're not Romeo and Juliet, but it would still be beautiful to end the way they did together. Besides, socialism's construction is over. What? Solveig said while stroking her scalp. Damn it, the Grandma Ugdal said. Let's go. We're too old. Nothing interesting left here. Stop talking like that, Solveig said. You're sputtering nonsense like a dead owl jabbering in the tar.
That's right. He just keeps saying what? Even like a little bit later.
You. Like, yeah. I just envision like her being like explaining all this stuff. Like there's a great
she tried to talk distinctly to no avail. What?
There's a super famous Grant Morrison issue of Animal Man, the comic, where there's like a roadrunner telling the story, or Wile E. Coyote telling the story about like how he's been trying to chase like Roadrunner and all these explosions, and it's telling this whole story of like the world that he lives in and how oppressive it is, and he just wants to get out and he can't escape and he's stuck and he's constantly being like assaulted by like cartoon weapons and like destroyed. And then like the last frame is like a person that the Wile E. Coyote or whoever, if I'm remembering this right, is telling it to, and that person is like, I don't know what you're saying, and it shows like all the like the writing is just like scratches and like the sound bubble, and that the character's been explaining this whole elaborate thing, but like to no avail because they can't communicate whatsoever because it's a cartoon and a human, and that's what I envision this being, like her explaining this grand, beautiful vision. He's just like, is that a word? What are you doing? So she jumps in and he stays there.
It's actually too that again, there's this little line too. I already told you. It says on page 444. I already told you that you do best to throw them into the well. So Olivia says, "What? The cylinders? They're no good for anything. Nobody's listening to them anyway. Throw them to the core."
Yeah. Yep.
Because before, like I felt like those had like this reverence, this mythical, like there was something like early on when we read about the cylinders, there was something that was like magical and wonderful, and like a holy reverence to him. And like now he's just like just throw it in. Who cares?
Yeah, they were kind of the Bible of that time. In a sense. Like that time was way over, and so like the new Bibles are being written or spoken, and those ones are done,
and the old ones are done away with. No one's even listening to them anyway.
I'm the one I should throw into the core. I'm the one who's done my time. I don't understand you at all.
What are you talking about? Either one, like they're just not talking to each other. It's weird.
I couldn't stop laughing at this. It really is. There's also that scene in Before Sunrise in which they like Ethan Hawke and Julie Delphi are on the train and they're talking about how over time like men's hearing, they lose like the upper register and women lose the lower. So like as couples get older, they have a harder time like physically hearing each other speak, which this sort of represents too. Where like they just disconnect. They can't communicate at all.
The interesting trick that Volodine does here was I'm not sure how he does it, but I found myself feeling like a little bit bad for Solivier, and like I shouldn't. Like this guy's a monster.
Yeah,
right? He's awful. He's been awful to the whole thing. But there was something where like, so you've done all this monstrous stuff, but for what? Like what do you have?
Yeah, you have nothing.
You have nothing, right? And everything that you've done is going to be rewritten, and it's not going to be for you anymore. Like he's coming. Like there's this realization of that. I think that he's getting at the end of his time, even if he is eternal. Like I don't even know if he's going to be gone or not, but just know that he's no longer part of the narrative, even though he's still there. Like
no system can last forever.
Yeah. And it's not that I was like sad for him, but it just, it hit, like it struck an emotional note of being empathetic with just being passed over, or not, like what you've done is meaningless. There's that, like a little bit of like, if there could be heart to nihilism, this would be like,
I think that's all super encapsulated on 450. He threw into the well the half dozen cylinders that the Grandma Ugdal had spared, and for good measure, he added the kettle and the phonograph horn. If there had been witnesses, they would have reported that his face was soaked in tears, but that he didn't seem particularly crestfallen. And on the contrary, he seemed full of energy, gesticulating exaggeratedly like a fairground huckster in front of a crowd. In reality, his heart was bleeding. His beloved had flown away forever. Nothing interested him anymore, and every part of him was suffering. But he insisted loudly that he could keep on living. Him or me doesn't matter. And then he does one last poem.
Yeah, which, to be honest, I skimmed through a little bit.
Same.
I'm sure there's like really good stuff in here, but oh man, I hate his poetry, so I don't want It's like, screw you, Solveig. I'm not reading
Well,
it.
I mean,
I read it, but the end of it's actually really good.
That's what I was gonna say. The end of it is the part that he's like,
Turn the page of his aberrant narrative constructions, holding back from setting the torrent of his more organic, adulterous, or incestuous loves deep within his monologue, and instead of reciting them again in detail to console himself before extinction, he just interminably whispered lists of feminine pronouns, lists of grasses, lists of comrades, and lists of the unspoken. Then, already numb, already drowsy, he stopped murmuring.
Yep. Yeah.
There was something there that I leaned into the text a little bit right there. That definitely hooked me.
Yeah, and I think this is more or less his like swan song end of like awareness. So,
and there's also that satisfaction of when you're reading before, like, what the hell are they just random lists? Why is this at the beginning? We're just wondering, why is it written like this? This is where like all of those threads start really being stitched together so nicely. For us to start understanding and having all those aha moments.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it does end his story nicely in a way that like doesn't forgive him by any stretch of the imagination, but at least gives him a little bit more nuanced character than just being a supervillain that's one-dimensional supervillain.
Yeah, and for me, like he was for the most part, he just was supervillain, where I didn't feel a lot of sympathy for him at all throughout the whole thing.
No,
and I don't think I was supposed to.
No, he's like the thing you must rise up against.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a mind raper. Like, why on earth would I? Yeah,
he's horrible. So these last three chapters, like this 47 is Hanko again, like talking about the writing. This is where she talks about the numbers, and she's living by herself, and everything. She's sort of putting her place in order. So she's by herself. She's writing these books. This includes my favorite line. So my favorite line of the whole of this for today, rather than doing it at the end, I'm going to do it right now because it's so wonderful. On page 453, her spelling was now a catastrophe. She wasn't very good with syntax. Ink and paper were missing, but she wrote books.
Hey, that sounds like me. That sounds exactly like me.
With a catastrophe. It's such a great.
My writing's a catastrophe.
Oh man! But then we get 48 and 49, and these two are paired.
Daddy,
interestingly, I think. So 48, and this is where like the interpretation part will come in at the end. So 48 is Hanko in her house, but then she sees Miriam or Marek reach the clearing. She sees Samaya reach the same space, and all three of them have a weapon, and all three of them have their weapons trained on each other. And so they're left. Here's the last part, 465, the last section with the women. The three sisters are now frozen, the rifles pointed at each other. They watch each other from afar with hostility and without trying to make any contact. They know that they've reached the end of their path, and they refuse to dirty the hours that remain by bringing back the monstrosities they had suffered for 1,000 years, by reviving Solveig, the cursed father who had transmitted the curse of his own immortality to them. Above all, not to remember Solveig. This is what all three of them were collectively thinking. They would prefer to focus on insignificant images. They mentally find themselves in the company of this unimportant Kronauer, whom none of them had loved and who had come unheeded into their minds. And so they just sit there. The end of their story, the end of these three women's stories, is the three of them with rifles pointed at each other, not trying to communicate and trying to ignore Solveig, and that's it. The future, whatever happens there, would be nothing.
Yeah.
By contrast, 49 is the ending of Schulhoff and Kronauer. And what they do is he tells a story, he's singing, whatever. The lack of an audience hadn't bothered them. In the moment that when their performance had concluded, it saved them from having to get up to bow, which would have required an effort then from them that they weren't able to make anymore. They preferred to stay there in an exaggerated prostrate position, legs splayed and necks bent forward, without having anything else to say or do. While they lounged in numbness and in the decline of nearly all their bodily and mental functions, supposedly to collect themselves again after the performance and regaining their strength, but in reality, because sleeping didn't concern them, the crow that had listened to them up until then clicked his wings and his beaks and landed at the top of the ditch, blah, blah, blah. And then pecks out Scholoff's eye, which is also kind of unnerving, so you can't see necessarily, and ends with, I don't believe in anything, Scholoff said. I'm waiting for the end. But the men are lounging, telling each other stories, and just like chilling next to each other. The crow pecks out Scholoff's eyes, and he's like, whatever, who gives a shit? They're just like passive, laying there, and the three women are locked into a situation in which they're aiming at each other and not communicating, which I feel like those two are set up as like a very like strange parallel or contrast. And in part, the three women are set up like that, possibly not like to say something about their traumatic stress, because their whole idea of not communicating is because they don't want Solove's existence to be part of their memory again.
Yeah. No, and I don't want to necessarily try to untangle everything involved with it, but to me, it reminded me of, like, at least within like the United States and modern Western culture, the demise of like second and third wave feminism, where it ended up actually being infighting within the movement that didn't allow it to get the strength and the foothold it needed to make the impact that was necessary. And it's like, and then on the contrast, the dudes are just like, like leaning back, like,
who cares?
Terrible stuff's happening, whatever, nonchalant. Like I like that contrast of showing like the future is for these women. Like they're the ones that are going to write the future. Like no matter how terrible, and they're inheriting something awful because of all the men in charge that have come before. Like they're the ones that are inheriting this mess, and it's theirs. But it's like they're so fucked up because of what had happened to them physically, mentally, whatever. Like, how do you trust each other? How do you build a future together? And I think like that locked in combat but not moving and not speaking is very powerful. Especially it ends, with immediate or distance, the future, right, with them. Whereas the very next chapter, when we get the men, it goes with, I don't believe in anything, I'm waiting for the end. But they're comfortable and relaxed in that. And so it's a very interesting contrast, and I'm wondering if he's speaking to that with the way that's juxtaposed.
Yeah, exactly.
My gut thinks maybe that's where it's going, but I'm not, I don't know enough about feminist movements or like the depths and the terribleness of centuries of patriarchy and political systems to really unlock all of that. But I feel like that's kind of that weird push that the book went to. Not a weird push, like it's been building up to it the whole time, but I feel like that's that ending somber note that we hit with 48 and 49.
It is really disappointing in some ways too, and that is an ending, but like disheartening, because like early on we talked about the idea that a lot of the book was, one of the big themes of the book was how to create a system in which you could live humanely, and that the communist system had been working, and then everything blew apart, the Soviets did. And then the Radiant Terminus was like the fascist version. The Cox language is always problematic. Like anything that you had, like, was there a way? And there's like something early on where it's like we tried not to think about these things, so that we could be able to communicate with each other as like human beings. And at the end, we don't get that. Like there's no good positive resolution. We get three women locked in combat and two guys just waiting to die.
Yeah, I'm curious too. When we got to that section you had read earlier about she wasn't going to describe the rape.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder within literature, if there is a contrast between men and women authors in the way they describe violence and sexual violence to women's bodies.
I'm sure.
Is it men that are more graphic with it? Like using to use Radiant Terminus term, like is the Cox language overtaken that as well? And so is there a pushback with this saying like, well, why, like, I'm not going to write it like that. Why would I do that? Like,
yeah,
I found that really, really interesting. I don't even know how I would, I'm sure there's papers written about it. I'll look it up or something. Sure, I didn't have a chance to do that before this one, but that was a really interesting point made up as well. Like, no, that's the male narrative. I'm not writing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's an interesting book. It's like how we have pitched it as like this sci-fi sort of book, which it is, and to certain degrees and all that. And a very plotted book of his, award-winning book of his, is all true, but it also is a really interesting like meditation on humanity, power structures, and gender.
Well, yeah, because first, like, it's like, the failures of capitalism. Okay, well then what do we want to do instead of that?
And the failures of Soviet.
Like, okay, there's the failure of that. What do we want to try now? Let's try this Radiant Terminus failure. There's that. So what does the future hold for us? Whatever it is, nothing.
I feel like
I'm waiting for the end. Like,
it's sort of like, I didn't get to reread this whole post-exotic novels, novellas, and novelists thing, but I'll link to it so that people can check it out, because it is a long article by Volodine about post-exotic novels and what some of this means, or what it sort of can be interpreted as. And there's a part early on where he says, like, we don't want to write. The whole point is to like, upend official literature. Like, upending official literature is sort of the point of post-exotic stuff. But he says, like, they still like are tied to novels because so these haikus, these rantings, these streamlike tales, they create works that resemble novels. They make novels. For them, the idea of the novel is associated with the impressions they have made of those who will receive their stories. Prisoners, at first attentive and infrequent listeners within these walls, then second, a large public of bookstore readers outside these walls. Sympathizing or not, these readers demand something particular of the book they've gotten hold of. Specifically, I think they're preparing for a dive. They hope to immerse themselves beyond their world, within another world, and for that immersion to be enjoyable, or even just possible, and they need friends and travel companions to guide them into their crossings and characters. They're waiting for a dialogue, both conscious and not, between their memories and those which propel the book, between their memories and our own. They hope that a distinct narrative thread will ensure the narrative's continuity. Whether this continuity obeys a linear or oscillating or circular sequence doesn't matter. In just about every post-exotic work, this continuity begins on the first page and goes straight to the last. So there's like, it sort of positions itself as like what they're trying to do, where it is using the forms that exist, and there are very novelistic forms within this, upends it in certain ways, and is talks about that relationship between the two groups of readers, the prisoners and the people in bookstores, which is kind of amazing. Being like, here's my audience, prisoners who aren't going to really be paying attention at first, but it'll get to them, and bookstore readers.
Yeah, I guess what I learned most from reading this book is that men have had generations and generations and generations of writing the history the way they want, and just having different systems and screwing it up so bad that basically whatever, if the future is female, good luck, because we've screwed it up so bad, there's probably nothing you can do about it at this point. So just throw yourself into the irradiated core of the ruined earth.
Yeah.
That's kind of the take home. Like, sorry, we kind of screwed this beyond repair. Here you go. It's like returning the rental car that's been rolled 8 times and the engine's about to fall out. Like, here, you drive. I'm good.
The only sort of Volodine inspired dream that I had last night was one in which I kept being in these various cars being driven by other people. They were more like buses, and there'd be all these other cars coming at us, mostly in both lanes. So you'd have to go on the shoulder because they were known as obeying traffic laws. And it just kept crashing into things. Like, people kept crashing, and like cars would go spinning and spiraling. I was like, God damn, I hope we don't hit, because I know like that spin is going to freak me out to like be flipping through, and everything was just barreling into one another. So it seems pretty much like this.
Yeah, no, this like
systems
this
and
book has
everything.
been. It didn't invade my dreams so much, but like for me, it's just made me want to like hug my daughter a little bit tighter, because I don't know what the future is going to be like for her.
This is also like an environmental catastrophe book. Like, this is
like, I don't think it's going to be like Waterworld necessarily, or like the Drowned World where there's albino alligators eating people, but I don't think the future is going to be all that great necessarily. And I'm an optimistic person. Like, to me, it just like reminds me, like, man, I gotta be a better person. I
have a question for you. When did that change? So like in the beginning of the century, and in like the 40s, let's say, and 50s, like everything was like, oh man, technology is going to make the future amazing. We're going to have flying cars. We're going to have like robots that take care of our houses. We're never going to have to work because robots can do everything. All the future technology is going to be amazing. We'll be going to the moon and back and all that stuff. And now like the relationship towards technology is much more mixed, in part because the environmental collapses that we're witnessing, or climate change and all that, but also like most people are more, there's like the idea that AI is going to take over and going to fuck us all. There's like, it's not completely good. Like, are looking towards the future isn't like we can create things that will solve these problems. I think it was in the 50s. It was like, whatever the problem is, humans are so good at coming up with these new technological solutions, and with figuring things out, we'll figure it out and we'll make the future a brighter place. And now it's like the future, I hope, is a long ways off, because we're not going to have clouds.
Yeah.
Like, what?
I don't know. I think
change.
Well, I think for me, it was like, you know, we're a generation that got to witness the kind of the birth and the proliferation of the internet, right? Connecting the world, where we're able to do like that's absolutely incredible invention, right? And basically to have the fund of knowledge of all of human history at your fingertips at any moment, so just pluck it immediately. That's like, you would think that is the height of human civilization, to be able to do that, right? All of our collected knowledge in an instant, and instead it's people looking at porn while they take a shit. Right, that's what we've done with
cat videos.
Sure, it's either one or the other. That's all it is, right? That's all you get. So at the height of the greatest gift humankind could give to each other, that's what we've done with it. So like, you know what? Technology is not going to fix anything, but I think we're the problem. All right,
we're the problem. Yeah.
I'm gonna pull a Kronauer and just put my feet up and wait to die. You can either do that or just point guns at each other, and we do that as well. Point guns at each other and just be like, "I'm damaged. You're damaged. Who's speaking first?" Like, it's not good. It's not good.
Really not good. Shit. There is that whole like Bakhtinian sort of look at things of like which character comes out the best as being like sort of like not subliminal, but like implicit like viewpoint that the author is promoting. And I guess I don't know, Grandma Ugdal comes out okay because she finally gets to end it, and Kronauer is just like, the best thing you can do is not do anything. This is like Zen. This is all like 485 pages of Zen.
Well, I mean, yeah, because I mean, at least Grandma Ugdal got to kind of go out on her terms, sort of, but not even though, because she did it by herself. It was supposed to be both of like, so even that, like,
yep.
I was about to say no, that wasn't good either. Nope. Yeah, nobody.
And like he's always trying to avoid the Cox language, so it is sort of a Buddhist like he keeps everything out of his mind. Everyone's trying to keep things out of their mind, remain clean.
Well, even that, like, how terrifying is that your own mind, your own thoughts you have to keep your mind clear of that, because those are going to betray you as well. Like, you have what there's nothing to trust, nothing to like, you just have to sit there and wait to die, basically. But you can't die because you're stuck in like this Bardo state in the woods or whatever. So it goes on forever.
And you're just
yeah.
It's uplifting.
Way to go.
Yeah, right on. This is an amazing book. Rereading this slowly like this has been really like intense.
Yeah, no, this is a book I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to set it down for a little bit, and I want to come back to it again, knowing now how it ends, and write down all the numbers, do all the fun stuff with, and then like, because he's packed this with so much kind of fun playfulness, and it would be fun to maybe get some of the playfulness out of it with it being so dour, right? On the first reading, it's hard to pick up on that.
Now we have 2 new books of his that are being translated, but at this point I've read every single one of his books at least once, and most of them twice. So I'm ready for more. I'm ready for more, and I'm ready to like go back into it later with like trying to kind of piece together the different groupings of these books and like how they sort of relate to one another. There are characters that overlap. There are like, this one's a standalone sort of like novel, and then the other ones are about like the post-exotic world and like how it intersects with a novel like this. It's like an interesting, not that it needs to be put into like a timeline or like it's coherent, but just like the interplay between them. Like, I think there's interesting pairings that can go on between the different books.
The other thing that would be really interesting too with this as well is, and again, it's way too smart for me to be able to do it, is to have someone read it with that understands feminist history and get a feminist perspective of reading, like patriarchal power systems and the trauma it's caused and the power structure. A reading of it that way, and then somebody that's looking at it through rather than identity and intersexuality, somebody that's reading it through just class and then class struggle, with someone that's into power systems as far as like Marxist versus socialist versus capital, like reading it that way as well. And seeing how those two, what do they pull out of it in those readings? Because it's so layered with that kind of stuff, but you know, I can just maybe like get tiny bits of it, but not what's actually there.
So there is something that I'm going to link to that everyone should read is McKenzie Wark, who is a theorist, like a Marxist sort of theorist, who has a number of interesting books that have been written. He wrote a long article about Volodine called The October Revolution of Antoine Volodine that's about Radiant Terminus. And it involves a lot of stuff like this and talks about Andrei Platonov's books, Shklovsky, various things like that, new economic policies in Russia. Stalker shows up in here, and it deals with Radiant Terminus. I'll link to it and I'll send it to you, but I'm going to go back and reread it now because I read it when it came out, and it came out like a year after the book had came out, or more than a year after the book had come out, I think. And it's on Verso's blog, and it's a really like intelligent, far more intelligent than anything that I could ever write or think through about this book. And I think now, having reread it and with it fresh in my mind, I think it'll mean even more, and it might address some of the things that you just asked about.
Yeah, I think, and maybe they already exist, I don't know, but an academic essay looking at it through the female characters, I think that'd be a fantastic academic essay that I could easily see getting placed. Post-exotic, it's just got really cool buzzwords to it. Post-exotic literature, and
somebody should create an online post-exotic journal in which like people write about post-exoticism and these books and like all the various angles and things.
Yeah, please link that. I want to read that. That sounds.
I will. It's really good. So, did you have a favorite line before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I gotta hurry. I'm at 8%. I remember I died.
I didn't bring in the note to see if I was right about the ending of this, but
unlike the characters, I died. My battery lasts about 58 minutes exactly. Doing this. I had one. I already read one of them that I really liked about the cylinders being good for nothing. So what's the point?
Yeah.
It's just the start was funny too. On 416, Hanko Volodine set her pen aside and counted the pages she had just written. 4. In a week, she had inked 22. She had a small, gleeful smile. Her work was progressing.
That's being a writer, huh?
Yeah, I feel that. But no, for me, I think the one that jumped out a lot for me was when he tells her to throw the cylinders in there because they're no good for anything. Nobody's listening to them anyways. Throw them to the core.
Yeah.
Like that was the one that would just bang hit me.
Absolutely. So we'll be back in a few weeks. We'll announce it on the website. But the next book that we'll be covering in season 8 of the 2-month review is CoDex 1962, a trilogy by Sjón. Sjón's an Icelandic author who's written a number of books that have been translated, including The Blue Fox, From the Mouth of the Whale, The Whispering Muse, and most recently Moonstone. He was born in 1962, hence possibly a reference to the title. He got an Oscar nomination for the lyrics that he wrote to Dancer in the Dark, the movie. This book is a trilogy, and there's three novels within it. Thine Eyes Did See My Substance, which is a love story, Iceland's 1,000 Years, which is a crime story, and I'm a Sleeping Door, which is a science fiction story. I have read this already and remember most of it, so this will be a little bit better at like being able to direct things in this season than in other ones. But basically, it's a book about a man and about his creation, how he comes into being, how he gets formed, and what that means to Iceland and to the world and to one's own individual personality. Sjón's a very interesting writer, can be very surreal and very like down to earth at the same time, sort of Volodine-like. So there's a bit of connection between these two. And the book's available in hardcover from FSG. I don't know when their paperback comes out. It was one of my favorite books of 2018. So I'm excited to talk about this and to share it with you guys. I think it's really spectacular. I know some people struggled with it because you don't know where it's going for a long time or how these pieces really like connect. But I think going through it like this, it'll be very rewarding, and it does have a lot to do with like the future, and a lot of stuff that we've been talking about with Radiant Terminus might really inform the reading of this. So
it looks a little, maybe it's an optical illusion. It just looks a little thick.
It's not as, it's 500 pages. So it's just slightly longer than this one. But it's made up of three novels too. And there's a lot of like pages that are.
No, I'm kidding.
It read really fast for me. I was afraid it was going to be really long, and I
was surprised how fast Radiant is like tough and as rough as Radiant Terminus was. It read really fast. Actually,
it really did. Yeah,
and maybe that's a sign of a great writer.
Yeah, yeah. And Sjón, I'm sure, I haven't told them that we're doing this yet, but he's someone that I've met several times, and hopefully he'll be willing to come on the podcast at least once and talk about his masterpiece. Supposed masterpiece. So cool. So we'll put the announcement of all the timing and all that up. If you're someone who is a big Sjón fan and you want to be on this, hit me up. Send an email. We're happy to have more guests. And until next time, I don't have anything else to add. So we'll stop here. And thanks for listening, and please share this with everyone. Give us a rating on iTunes. Tell your friends that they should be listening to this weekly book club of sorts, in which even if you don't read the book, you can get something good and fun out of it. I hope that's our point, is to make these books seem enjoyable and to give you a different way of dealing and digesting great literature. So thanks again for listening. Thanks everyone. And we'll be back in a few weeks with season 8.